So what I will speak about is actually how to do product management in a remote setting. I know that all of us had to experience this in the past few years, but at GitLab, this is not because of COVID, not because of necessity, but because of design. And as a result, I think there is quite a lot to be learned, even outside of GitLab, on how people can do this by taking this example. A few words about me. My name is Viktor Nagy. I'm from Hungary and I work for GitLab. Even before COVID, GitLab was the biggest remote company. So probably even today, it's the biggest that was purposefully set up to be a fully remote company. And that this is very interesting. In terms of product management, I have around 7 years of experience. Before that, I worked in engineering, and even as a product manager, I worked in very strictly co-located teams in office setup and as well in some hybrid remote setups. So I have possibilities to compare these setups from a product management perspective as well. If you would like to reach me, feel free to reach out to me on any of the ways shown here, and I will be available to chat even after the presentation. But today, I would like to share with you my experiences about remote product management. And the first question is that why should you care about the quality of product management at your company? I would say that at least two reasons for that. Many companies today follow agile practices and might even have some product-related processes, but they still remain feature factories and operate as feature teams. I think earlier today, there was a topic about this actually, or a few topics about this here at ProductCamp as well. And the reason for that, because why they remain feature teams, is because they don't have a proper discovery process, or the team is not empowered to act based on their best knowledge and insight. And the other reason is, so this was the kind of the business reason why, if you are head of product, why would you like to have good product management practices at your company? The other approach is from your personal perspective as a product manager. Is it something that could be interesting to you? And there, I think, from a professional point of view, you have to adopt, because it's a very, very different style of product management than a co-located team, actually, with a very different dynamics, especially. But from personal perspective, it's a huge win. I will mention this later as well. As I mentioned, I worked for and even left a company that was not willing to follow proper product management practices. And actually, they found someone else on that position, and they still exist today. So you can survive even without doing product management properly and working in feature teams. But this talk is for you if you would like to do real product management and not just a resume, not just a title in your resume, or if you lead a product management organization and you are thinking about going over remote. First, there will be a bit of context setting to have a shared language. And throughout the presentation, I will try to give you a few practical tips and approaches to follow to run a successful product management team, product team in a remote setup. Let's get started. So the context setting, what different setups do we have for remoteness? On the left side, you see the no remote setup. This is very well known for everybody. If you imagine an office building, when everybody is co-located, that's a no remote setup. Of course, once you start to have bigger companies where you might have your engineering outsourced somewhere else and your product team is in the US, very typical, then all this just, you move away from the no remote setup to something different. And in the remote allowed or hybrid remote setups, there are a few exceptions who are not in the same office. It might be for many, many reasons. And if it's not a business related reason, like things were just separated on purpose, but even in that case, often there's a huge tension between the different locations and the people who are allowed to work remotely and who are not. The remote first setting is an interesting one. And you can often end up in such a situation when you have multiple offices, for example, when you outsource your engineering to a cheaper area and your product management is still in one of the centers. You can run an effective product team in this setting with a very similar approach that what I'm going to talk about most of the time today, that is the all remote setting. The big difference between the remote first and hybrid settings is that in the remote first case, all the processes are intentionally set up to favor remote work. And this is very, very important actually. But even in this case, it might happen that these processes just break down or are circumvented by the collocated people. And this is the biggest issue in a remote first setup. I worked in such a setting, remote first setting, for quite a few years before joining Gitlab. And it was much harder in many ways than all remote actually, that I first experimented at Gitlab. Because in the all remote setting, there are literally no offices. In this setup, all the processes favor asynchronous work with all its benefits and shortcomings. But as the processes are set up to support all remote, we have a chance to address the shortcomings. And this is very important, I think. I hope everyone knows the people quoted here. If you have not heard about Matic again yet, then I highly recommend to check out at least his book Inspired and start to follow his blog. And you can learn a lot about product management. He's probably the biggest thinker and consultant in product management today. And he's not a fan of remote product management. He considers it a necessity, sometimes something that we should adopt our practices to in cases when it cannot be avoided, but he would prefer to just avoid them to provide a setup for high-performing product teams. I do not agree with him that this cannot be done right, on the other hand. And this talk will be about that, how we can do remote product management right, and what are the huge differences between collocated and remote product management. Let's stop a little bit at the second quote from Jeff Bezos, especially the why part of that quote. According to him, creativity comes from interactions, while inspiration comes from concentration. Thus, creativity is best achieved with collocated teams, while inspiration does not require it. And the biggest lesson from writers, composers, artists in general is that the moment of inspiration is just the start, and then it's hard work all the way. So if you put this together, the conclusion is something like inspiration works on your own, but it's only 1% of the work, and 99% is best achieved in a collocated setup, because that's where creativity needs inspiration per inspiration. And personally, I would say this is a huge exaggeration in the case of product management, because even the creative process where you actually come up with the solutions to a user problem benefits often from being on your own and digesting the information the best way you can digest any information. And another hidden item between these lines that I agree with is that creativity is actually hard work. So as a result, you should minimize the risks in the process of creativity, in that process of discovery. And how you can minimize the risks is what we know very well. You should iterate and get feedback as soon as and as often as you can. So basically, the question here is whether you can find the balance of lonely work versus collaborative work. And this will be the real question, whether remote product management will benefit you or not. Now that we have read these words, I would like to add a side note just to keep our focus on really product management. And the side note is that product teams actually have two big tasks: discovery and delivery. And today there seems to be an agreement that delivery is often improved in a remote setting. So the real question is the situation of discovery. And we should understand that if discovery fails, then we will become a feature factory. There's no other option. So even if you improve your delivery pipelines, if going remote breaks down your discovery pipelines, then you are not doing product management any longer. So this is something that we have to keep in mind, and something that is definitely something to look after. And as I said, my main argument is that you can benefit a lot from lonely work, and you have to find the right balance and the right approaches to collaborate in a remote product management setup. While I prepared to this call, I asked a few teammates at Gitlab two questions. The first question was, what do they consider to be the biggest difficulty in remote product management? And these are some of the answers that they provided. And the first one is that basically creating a shared understanding can be challenging at first. You need to communicate and discuss your vision and strategy continuously in order to create a shared understanding and to make sure that everyone had their voice heard. This is common even in a collocated setting, that you have to communicate your vision, you have to communicate your strategy, but the level of that communication differs a lot. It has a very different dynamics how you can get feedback on your communication. It has a very different nature. The channel of communication is often written or in a video, and you have to solicit feedback afterwards. So you don't have the personal contact, you cannot read body language and anything like that. You can try to do other things as well, like you can try to take on the well-known design sprint idea and write in a remote setting that can kind of fast track you around your strategy, for example. I tried that in a naive way, and it is extremely tiresome. On the other hand, since then, we were iterating on how to do design sprints and remote setup. Now we are at version 3, and that seems to work pretty well. But I just want to warn you, not be as naive as I was and don't run a design sprint as you do it in a collocated setup, because if you are truly remote with people from the other end of the world, somebody will be extremely tired by the end of the day. For your daily work, you should actually focus on building trust and processes for asynchronous ideation, feedback gathering, and to learn to work on multiple tracks at the same time. Because delivery is still slower than discovery, even in a remote setup. As a result, you have plenty of time to validate ideas on different tracks, validate different ideas continuously. And this is something that we should learn. The whole dynamics of remote product management is very different from the dynamics of collocated product management, actually. And you should leave time as well for your own team to provide feedback. So when there's a technical feasibility question or a usability question, you can ask those questions and the response might come only next day. During that day, pick on another topic and start to prepare that. At the same time, you should and can continuously get feedback from your users. And this is what we discussed before I started the presentation, that one of the values of GitLab is transparency. And this enables our users to just see whatever we want to work on. And it's very easy to build up a customer advisory board and invite interested people into a specific topic that you regularly interview about that topic, for example. And even others can join those issues as well, so I can easily reach out to all the users. And once we start to work on a problem space, I again regularly reach out to the users who commented or just liked a related issue and ask them for interviews, so I can even learn more and more. And this is how we validate even our solutions. Now, what are the benefits? I would like to emphasize the first point here, diversity. Because diversity is often understood to be a politically correct approach without much business benefits. And this is actually wrong. Diversity has direct measurable benefits for the business. Our thinking is largely influenced by our culture, and by having a globally diverse team, our product becomes way more accessible simply by operating in a remote fashion. And this is extremely powerful, actually. So even how people consume the information, when I have to ask the engineers to provide feedback, some of them don't feel comfortable to provide me responses quickly in a face-to-face meeting. And working in a remote setup allows them to think through the ideas and come back with feedback. So that feedback can be incorporated into product, and this is something that you will simply lose in a collocated setup, actually, or you have to be very careful on how you treat different people. But more on that, the cultural differences are still there and still adds to the outcome, and we can build a way more accessible product this way. On the human side of the benefits of remote setup is actually for the people involved themselves. Meeting others from the other end of the world on a daily basis provides experiences most people never get in their life. You can organize cross-cultural cooking sessions. You will likely play some games together from time to time, online, of course. And these are all things that in the end make us human. And this is just a great experience as a person to have this exposure to different cultures and different people in the world. Another personal benefit is what many would call work-life balance. Actually, I don't like to speak about work-life balance because the balance assumes opposing sides. And in a remote setting, work becomes an integral part of your days. And as you're totally empowered to work whenever and wherever you are, you can fit it into your private life instead of having it to complete it. Just to give you a very specific example, 3 hours ago, I went to swim. It was 11 o'clock here in Hungary, and I can do that. It's not an issue because the company trusts me. They know that I will work everything. I will do all my job. I do it in a high quality. And it might happen that I will work a little bit longer today, but I could work the way I want to work. And this is just invariable from a personal perspective. Now, if you consider the last 3 quotes here, you can see that even creative process requires a lot of thinking. And sometimes it's more efficient to think alone, sometimes to think through interactions. And this goes back to a discussion we had from Jeff Bezos and so on, that creativity requires collaboration. This is not actually 100% true. Sometimes collaboration helps creativity because we can bounce off ideas. But if you have the process to get those ideas surfaced, to be able to share them and get feedback on them, then you will have the bouncing of ideas and you still get the time to think through them on your own whenever it fits you. And the remote setting is very strong in this one, and your processes, communication, transparency should help you to provide the necessary interactions actually. So a few very specific tips. If you consider to have remote product management setup for whatever reason, I would highly encourage you to go all remote from the possibilities that I shared at the very beginning. And even in that setup at GitLab, for example, as most of the product manager work is with designers, they try to organize designers and product managers in teams so that they have a large overlap in our working time. For example, in my case, the product manager is in London. That's just 1 hour later than my working hours. And this way we can check out the version, give and take feedback, go back to create the next version. Again, the last part is asynchronous. And whenever I'm pinged on Slack that there's a new version, I know that that's a top priority for me to give feedback there. So these things you can organize very well. The next topic is business strategy and understanding the user problem are key for alignment, and invite the team to user calls. You can do that in a collocated setting. You can do that in a remote setting as well. It might happen that some people never attend user calls because they are just at the very other end of the world. You can still record those calls most of the time. You can create summaries of the calls, and others can watch them async in those cases. There are great tools today like Dovetail to keep track and organize the insights. And going back to strategy, when the strategy changes, give it a lot of time for the team to digest and to understand what is actually changing. If you ever went through a strategy change at a well-managed mid-sized company, you probably experienced a huge amount of written and verbal communication to get the message through to everyone. Now you need that level of communication even at the scale of a single team. And this is definitely a little bit of extra burden, but at the end, you get amazing alignment around your strategy. And that has its value, actually. Next idea is trust. I mentioned trust a few times, that you should build trust, etc. But it's even better if you understand that trust is a decision. As a result, it's your decision to trust your engineers that you work with. And after that, you can still deal with, if they don't know this, how can you help them to trust you and to work together on your trust? And for that, the best idea is to socialize a lot. you can have what at GitLab we have so-called coffee chats that are like 30 minutes chats with anybody throughout the company. It's like if you would take a coffee or lunch with someone in an office. Those are great, but actually I would even recommend to having open-ended conversations with your teammates, because in open-ended setup, you are not time bound, and as a result, soon you will run out of operational discussions, and that's when you can start discussing directions. You can just start discussing personal issues. Like I know about one of my engineers when their daughter's kindergarten got flooded and he had to take care of the daughter for several weeks. And these open-ended conversations are extremely, extremely fruitful. So we started to use them with one of the engineers last spring. And slowly I realized that that's one of the major inputs to the direction of the team, because it's such a fruitful discussion. We know each other very, very well on a personal level. And as a result, even when we have to work asynchronously through issues while one of us is asleep, we know what the other will likely think of our ideas, and we understand each other in a much faster way simply because we have regular discussions, the two of us. So I have this course now with everybody throughout the team to make the discussions much more easier when we have to work asynchronously through written words in an issue, for example. And finally, transparency is super important, because if all your work is transparent, then users can reach you, they can give you feedback continuously, and as a result, you can reach out to them for focused feedback and for more information whenever it's needed. Last but not least, even in a remote setting, remote means that you are remote from your engineers, not that you are remote from your users. You can still visit local users. Like here in Hungary, one of our users is Siemens, and I went out to the Hungarian Siemens office, met the people there and had a chat with them. They were super excited to have somebody from GitLab actually on site. For the delivery part, vision strategy is, again, super important. If the whole team understands why you follow a given direction, then they can make many, many decisions without your direct involvement. And here I would especially emphasize the user problem. If you help the team to have a very clear understanding of the user problem that you are trying to solve, then they can come up with the solution without your daily involvement in that. And this helps a lot. As you can see, I just repeated the two other terms from the previous slide, not by accident, because for delivery, it's, again, very, very important to have these strong ties, strong bonds with your team. And through tasks and social activities, you can get them. On the other hand, there's one more thing that I would emphasize in the delivery, and that's a very strong process and a lot of discipline around that process. Your team needs strong engineering management skills as a result. So I would either have a very, very grown-up team with a junior manager, or would definitely look for some very experienced engineering managers who know how to serve their team best with the process. In a co-located setup, there are quite a few agile processes that we typically follow. You can think about retrospectives, issue grooming, or sprint planning. You need the same processes, but transformed into a remote setup. And that is sometimes tricky. As I mentioned, the design sprints, if you do it naively, it will hurt you a lot, even though it will be a result. The results are there, but it's very, very tiresome. The next topic I would like to emphasize here is to ask early. So whenever you need feedback from your team, you should be extremely proactive. In a remote setting, answers often take a lot of time because people are just asleep when you ask the question, and by the time they answer, you will be asleep. So you should be aware of this, and it's very wise to ask as soon as possible. And finally, in terms of the related to issue refinement and sprint planning, in our case, we try to plan and prepare the next iteration continuously. I would say that even at the during the last time in a collocated setup, I did the same. But in a remote setup, that's the only option you can do, because when you go to a point that you have to plan the next sprint, if you don't have everything prepared by that time, you are late. There is just no other option to wait for anything. For example, in our case, the next iteration planning is a synchronous meeting, the final step of it. Actually, there are 2 synchronous meetings because we are really dispersed globally. And I'm not always present at these meetings because by that time I had prioritized the backlog. Everybody should have a good understanding of what's on that backlog, and I might be just sleeping during one of the meetings at least. So the engineers just know that it's their job to come up with a decision what they will take for the next iteration and go with that. So that required that we continuously prepared the issues for that call.